네, 이와주.
쉬었길래 다 버렸습니다.
Hello, viewers. Yes, that's today's topic, ihwaju. Ihwaju is an extreme makgeolli. It has the least amount of water in the recipe. It's thick like yogurt, and you can eat it with a spoon. So I'm glad you're here. I'm going to show you today what I did when I tried to make ihwaju myself. Don't do what I did. I did have to make some substitutions and adjustments, and you'll have to watch and see what happened. And please watch my earlier video for a detailed discussion of the ihwaju recipe. So on day 0, I have my rice flour, 500 grams of rice flour, and I'm going to make gumangdak. That's whole rice cakes. There are quite a few steps to making gumangdak, so let's get started. I have my water boiling. I added 400 milliliters of boiling water, just a bit at a time, to the rice flour and stirring as I went. This is my first substitution. I used dry rice flour instead of wet rice flour. So really the proper way would be to soak the rice and to grind it yourself. So just add a little boiling water and then stir it and then add some more. And since I used dry rice flour, I ended up using more water than the recipes that I read. So even so, it seemed like this was barely enough water to make a dough, but this assumption turned out to be wrong. So making this is an exercise in patience. If you keep on kneading, the dough eventually comes together somehow. So I do have a pretty hard lump of dough here, but I am going to let it rest just to allow the flour to absorb the water. So that was a good idea. So I let it rest for 20 minutes. And I cover it with a piece of wax paper so it doesn't dry out. Okay, so it feels like dough. I'm going to try to break this up into equal sized pieces. I need to practice making gumangdak. So the procedure is to roll it into a ball and then flatten it and poke a hole in the center and make sure it's relatively flat but nothing broken. I don't want it to fall apart. I don't want there to be cracks in it. And actually the dough is a little soft. So that actually means I could have used less water than I did. So that's interesting because I had a hard time mixing it up at the start. Just forming the dough was difficult for me. But forming the shape of the gumangdak is not so hard. So I have all these flat donut shapes. Each one of the gumangdak is 40 to 50 grams, and I have 19 of these in total. And I do keep it covered with a damp cloth so they don't dry out. Then slide them into boiling water carefully. And don't let them stick to the bottom. So stir gently, but don't break them, of course. So it'll take about 10 minutes to boil them. They'll float to the top. And then I'll take a few out at a time. Oh, it looks like I did break some of them. Take a few out at a time and mash them up. So that's one of the mysteries of this method that I discussed in my previous video, that you go to the work of forming the gumangdak a certain shape, and then immediately after cooking them, you mash them. You need to be quick about mashing them because it starts getting hard and difficult to mash up. So I decided to use this wooden masher instead of the spatula. It's just getting too hard. But the masher worked okay. Okay, then I need to let this cool, so I cover it with a damp cloth. So you need some enzymes, of course, to brew ihwaju. And this is my second substitution. I used these Shanghai wine cakes, these Chinese yeast balls, instead of ihwaju. So ihwaju is the kind of nuruk that you're supposed to use. They're similar in concept, but they're not the same. So the Shanghai wine cakes and the ihwaju, they're both round and they're both made with rice flour, but they're not exactly the same. And so without ihwaju, I really need to ask myself, am I making ihwaju? I don't know. But this is what I had, and I wanted to do this experiment, so I'm using what I have. I'm going to try using these Shanghai wine cakes. And the thing is, you're supposed to use a lot of nuruk for this recipe, a lot of ihwaju, like at least 30% of the weight of the rice. So for my case, I'm using 145 grams of these yeast balls. So that's a lot to crush. I need them to be a powder. Then I'm going to use a sifter so I have it evenly, so the pieces are evenly sized. I can make sure that there's no chunks of the yeast balls, but this is taking a long time. So I do turn the yeast balls into a powder. It's a bit coarse, but it is a powder. And I'm also going to use some wine yeast. I'm pretty sure that's something that's missing from the Chinese yeast balls. I think the ihwaju would have more natural yeast in it. Look at all that powdered yeast ball. That's a lot. Now I have to mix this in with the cooled, crushed, mashed gumangdak, which is now just a hard lump. So it's a lot of kneading. This is really a lot of kneading to try to incorporate those and make it uniform. You are allowed to add a little more liquid, which I do, another 100 milliliters or so. And that's actually the water that was used to boil the gumangdak. It's cooled down now. But eventually I think I have it relatively uniformly mixed. And I'm going to take the whole lump and put it in a small jar. So this is the smallest jar I have. I think it's less than 3 liters. And I'm going to carefully clean it too because it's a bit messy putting it in there. Then I close the lid loosely and I put it in my fermentation chamber, my temperature-controlled fermentation chamber, which I've set to 23 degrees Celsius. So this is sort of risky. Is this going to work at all? It's just a lump of dough in a jar. Is it going to ferment? Well, the next day I listen to it and I do hear bubbles. So it is fermenting. It smells right to me, like the first stage of fermentation. Looking at it, it just looks like a lump of dough, though. And I need to stir this once a day for the first week at least. So it's just a bit softer, but it's still very dough-like. Now the next day, looking at the side, you can see bubbles forming in it. So that's a good sign. And it's a lot softer. Not really liquid yet, but a lot softer. Of course, it needs to be stirred again. Then on day 3, it really does look more liquid. Okay, that's much better. That's pretty much liquid now. Now it is more like a thick liquid. It'll much easier to stir. Yeah, just keep watching. You have plenty of bubbles. I want you to see the texture day by day, what's happening. Yeah, so it's looking good. It's continuing to ferment. And on day 6, you can notice on the top there's a layer of liquid, and that's I wasn't expecting that because the end result for ihwaju is supposed to be roughly the consistency of yogurt. It's not supposed to settle into layers, as far as I know. But I definitely have a layer of liquid at the top. Yeah, look at day 9. There's a clear layer of yellowish liquid at the top. And for the rest of the time, I'm just going to stir twice a week instead of every day. So you do have a chance to look at the texture, which is very liquid now. Now, because there's so little water in this recipe, I do want to let it ferment for a long time to give the enzymes and the yeast time to work. So now let's just watch every day, and you can see that liquid layer at the top is growing. And even though I stir it, it soon separates back into layers. So my plan is to ferment this for more than 3 weeks, for 23 days. Every day you can see that liquid layer getting a bit larger. Okay, so after 23 days, I'm going to refrigerate it, and then I'm going to scoop out that liquid layer because that's not really what I wanted. But it's easy to separate. Just with a ladle, I can pour it into this small glass jar, and I'll keep some to taste right now too. So that's my unexpected clear wine. The rest of it is takju, the cloudy wine, the very thick cloudy wine. You can see the texture. This is thicker than normal. And I'm going to pour it into these jars. When I bought some ihwaju in Korea, it came in a jar like this. So I'm putting these in the jar. But I do notice that the texture, even after all this time, the texture of the ihwaju is grainy. So even though I really pounded the yeast balls into a powder, I don't think it was enough because the texture of the ihwaju that I have is too grainy. I can tell just by when I'm pouring it out. So I put some in a bowl. So I have something to taste right now. I'm going to taste the clear wine and the takju, see what it's like. Okay, so here are my impressions today. Is that the clear wine has a fruity, yeasty aroma. It's sweet, and then you taste the alcohol. The finish is a bit harsh, but it's a very pleasant taste. It's not particularly strong in alcohol. And when I taste the takju with a spoon, the texture is grainy. The aroma is extra yeasty, maybe like ripe bananas. And it does have sweetness, but also quite a bit of bitterness, like from those yeast balls. And it has almost no lactic flavor. I think that's something that that should be there. I think if I used ihwagok, it's supposed to have lactic acid bacteria and supply that lactic flavor, which would be good. But I don't have that. But let's jump ahead a few days and taste it again. Okay, so it's 3 days later. I have both of these components. I have the chongju that I was not supposed to get from ihwaju. I was not supposed to get this clear layer. It settled, even though it wasn't supposed to. And it actually settled more than my hyangju that I made earlier. So this somehow turned out incorrectly, but I do have the thick part, the takju part of it, in this jar, and I'll try that because I want to see what the texture is like. Because the big problem when I tasted it, there were too many chunks of the powdered Shanghai wine cakes, the yeast balls that I had powdered, and even though I thought I had powdered them really finely, they didn't break down enough, at least in the sample I had. But that was further down in the brewing container, and this was from the top. This jar number 2, is from the top, so it might have less of that objectionable sediment. So let's look at the texture closely. Still seems a bit grainy. This should be sort of a yogurt texture. Also, it's looking a bit yellow. Ihwaju should be quite white, I would think. But this has turned out to be yellow. Now the aroma is not bad. I can smell it already. It does have a fresh aroma. So let me taste it. Yeah, that's the thing. The texture just is not right. It's too grainy. Maybe that's just my fault for not having the right ingredients. Maybe with ihwaju this would have turned out, but I substituted the Shanghai wine cakes, the yeast balls, and even though it did ferment, this taste is a lot stronger. There's a lot of bitterness. It just seems like the residual taste of the powdered yeast balls. Yeah, so much of it. It's pretty strong, bitter flavor. And this is not sweet enough. It's and the texture is off, too grainy. So my hyangju turned out a lot nicer. It was much sweeter, and the texture was very, very smooth. So that turned out more like ihwaju than this attempt. I do have a small amount here of the chongju. So let's see if I can pour some out here quickly. Okay, this has the good flavor. This is much fruitier and sweeter. Not super strong. The sweetness and the good flavors are all in this chongju part, and they're not in the sediment. So that's interesting. And so to evaluate how this turned out, this did not turn out well. My goal of making ihwaju, I'm going to have to try it with the correct. I'm going to have to try this again with the correct ingredients. I'm going to have to find some ihwaju and try this recipe again. But I did have fun making the gumangdak again. And so I look forward to trying this again and seeing how it turns out. But this result, I do have some chongju that tastes pretty good, but the ihwaju portion of it just didn't work out right. I don't think anyone's going to like this texture. Yeah, it's much too grainy and the flavor is not so good either. So yeah, just didn't work out this time. But as always, it's a learning experience. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know what you're brewing. Have you had any interesting outcomes in your brewing? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.